Peace, family. Welcome to another episode of Read and Roll Up. Got your reads, got your roll up. Let's get right into it. Listen, we are still reading Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. We are on this is now part 3 of chapter 3. Faith, visualizing and believing in the attainment of desire. Napoleon Hill considers this the second step to riches. Now, what's actually funny about today, before I started this, I always come out here. I got my water. I got, the roll up. I got my tea. You know what I'm saying? But I like getting the teas. I always got a quote. And this one, notice today, it says, one who knows how to enjoy life does not need riches. And one thing I want to point is that the word in the quote is need. Oh, but what we talk about is desire. Now, if y'all want a whole different rant on desire versus need, I need the likes. y'all fuck with me. You know what I'm saying? But so right now we continue in chapter 3, and now he's about to go in on a story about Charles Schwab creating the United States Steel Corporation. Right here is this story right here. It says a pretty after dinner speech for $1 billion. I thought it was, you know what I'm saying? Like, just drop it. All right, bet. Let that be your chance to spark up. A pretty after dinner speech for $1 billion. When on the evening of December 12, 1900, some 80 of the nation's financial nobility gathered in the banquet of the hall of the University Club on Fifth Avenue to do honor to a young man from out of the West. Not half a dozen of the guests realized they were to witness the most significant episode in American industrial history. Quote, J. Edward Simmons and Charles Stuart Smith, their hearts full of gratitude for the lavish hospitality bestowed on them by Charles M. Schwab during a recent visit to Pittsburgh, had arranged the dinner to introduce the 38-year-old steelman to Eastern banking society. But they didn't expect him to stampede the convention. They warned him, in fact, that the bosoms within New York's stuffed shirts would not be responsive to oratory, and that if he didn't want to bore the Stillemans and Harrimans and Vanderbilts, he had better limit himself to 15 or 20 minutes of polite vaporings and let it go at that. He said, time is money. Time is money with these niggas, right? Even John Pierpont Morgan, sitting on the right hand of Schwab, even John Pierpont Morgan, even J.P. Morgan, sitting on the right hand of Schwab, as became his imperial dignity, intended to grace the banquet table with his presence only briefly. And so far as the press and public were concerned, the whole affair was of so little moment that no mention of it found its way into print the very next day. They said the shit went crazy that they didn't even want to tell y'all about it. That's wild. So the two hosts and their distinguished guests ate their way through the usual 7 or 8 courses. There was little conversation, and what there was of it was restrained. Few of the bankers and brokers had met Schwab, whose career had flowered along the banks of Monongahela. That's a title. So, whose career had flowered along the banks of Monongahela, and none knew him well. I don't know him well. But before the evening was over, they, and with them, Money Master Morgan, were to be swept off their feet, and a billion-dollar baby, the United States Steel Corporation, was to be conceived. It is perhaps unfortunate, for the sake of history, that no record of Charlie Schwab's speech at the dinner was ever made. He repeated some parts of it at a later date during a similar meeting of Chicago bankers, and still later, when the government brought suit to dissolve the Steel Trust, he gave his own version from the witness stand of the remarks that stimulated Morgan into a frenzy of financial activity. It is probable, however, that it was a homely speech, somewhat ungrammatical for the niceties of language never bothered Schwab, and so ungrammatical. He was somewhat ungrammatical. The way they be writing sometimes. But anyway, it was homely, somewhat ungrammatical, full of epigrams and threaded with wit. But aside from that, it had a galvanic force in effect upon the 5 billions of estimated capital that was represented by the diners. After it was over and the gathering was still under its spell, although Schwab had talked for 90 minutes, Morgan led the orator to a recessed window where, dangling their legs from the high, uncomfortable seat, they talked for an hour more. The magic of the Schwab personality had been turned on, full force. But what was more important and lasting was the full-fledged, clear-cut program he laid down for the aggrandizement of steel. Many other men had tried to interest Morgan in slapping together a steel trust after the pattern of the biscuit, wire and hoop, sugar, rubber, whiskey, oil, or chewing gum combinations. John W. Gates, the gambler, had urged it, but Morgan distrusted him. The Moore boys, Bill and Jim, Chicago stock jobbers, who had glued together a match trust and a cracker corporation, had urged it and failed. Albert H. Gary, the sanctimonious county lawyer, wanted to foster it, but he wasn't big enough to be impressive. Until Schwab's eloquence took J.P. Morgan to the heights from which he could visualize the solid results of the most daring financial undertaking ever conceived, the project was regarded as a delirious dream of easy money crackpots. The financial magnetism that began a generation ago to attract thousands of small and sometimes inefficiently managed companies into large and competition crushing combinations had become operative in the steel world through the devices that jovial business pirate John W. Gates. Gates already had formed the American Steel and Wire Company out of a chain of small concerns, and together with Morgan had created the Federal Steel Company. The National Tube and American Bridge Companies were two more Morgan concerns, and the Moore brothers had forsaken the match and cookie business to form the American Group, Tin Plate, Steel Hoop, Sheet Steel, the National Steel Company. But by the side of Andrew Carnegie's gigantic vertical trust, a trust owned and operated by 53 partners, those whose combinations were, that's a word. Ooh, Picauyune. That's a vocabulary. I can't look it up because I'm recording, but y'all fuck with me on the pronunciation of that word. Picauyune. Picayune. I don't know. Boy, those other combinations were fill in a blank. They might combine to their heart's content, but the whole lot of them couldn't make a dent in the Carnegie organizations, and Morgan knew it. They were petites, and that's what he just saying they were small. Yeah, that's basically what he's saying. I don't know why he used that word, but I know the intention of why you use certain words. You feel me? But crazy. The eccentric old Scot knew it too. From the magnificent heights of Skibo Castle, he had viewed, first with amusement and then with resentment, the attempts of Morgan's smaller companies to cut into his business. When the attempts became too bold, Carnegie's temper was translated into anger and retaliation. He decided to duplicate every mill owned by his rivals. Hitherto, he hadn't been interested in wire, pipe, hoops, or sheet. Instead, he was content to sell such companies the raw steel and let them work it into whatever shape they wanted. Now, with Schwab as his chief and able lieutenant, he planned to drive his enemies to the wall. So it was that in the speech of Charles Schwab, Morgan saw the answer to his problem of combination. A trust without Carnegie, giant of them all, would be no trust at all. A plum pudding, as one writer said, without the plums. Schwab's speech on the night of December 12th, 1900, undoubtedly carried the inference. Undoubtedly carried the inference, though not the pledge, that the vast Carnegie enterprise could be brought under the Morgan tent. He talked of the world for future for steel, of reorganization for efficiency, of specialization, of the scrapping of unsuccessful mills, and concentration of effort on the flourishing properties of economies in the ore traffic, of economies in overhead and administrative departments, of capturing foreign markets. More than that, he told the buccaneers among them that wherein they lay of their customary piracy. Their purposes, he inferred, had been to create monopolies, raise prices, and pay themselves fat dividends out of privilege. Schwab condemned the system in his heartiest manner. The short-sightedness of such a policy, he told his hearers, lay in the fact that it restricted the market in an era when everything cried for expansion. By cheapening the cost of steel, he argued, an ever-expanding market could be created, more uses for steel would be devised, and a goodly portion of the world trade could be captured. Actually, though he did not know it, Schwab was an apostle of modern mass production. So the dinner at the university club came to an end. Morgan went home to think about Schwab's rosy predictions. Schwab went back to Pittsburgh to run the steel business for Andrew Carnegie, while Gary and the rest went back to their stock tickers to fiddle around in anticipation of the next move. It was not long coming. It took Morgan about 1 week to digest the fat. It took Morgan about 1 week to digest the feast of reason Schwab had placed before him. When he had assured himself that no financial indigestion was to result, he sent for Schwab and found that young man rather coy. Mr. Carnegie, Schwab indicated, might not like it if he found his trusted company president had been flirting with the emperor of Wall Street, the street upon which Carnegie was resolved never to tread. Then it was suggested by John W. Gates, the go-between, that if Schwab happened to believe in the Bellevue Hotel in Philadelphia, J.P. Morgan might also happen to be there. When Schwab arrived, however, Morgan was inconveniently ill. at his New York home. And so, on the elder man's pressing invitation, Schwab went to New York and presented himself at the door of the financier's library. Now, certain economic historians have professed the belief that from the beginning to the end of the drama, the stage was set by Andrew Carnegie, that the dinner, the famous speech, the Sunday night conference between Schwab and the Money King were events arranged by the Kenny Scott. The truth is exactly the opposite. When Schwab was called in to consummate the deal, he didn't even know whether the little boss, as Andrew was called, would so much as listen to an offer to sell, particularly to a group of men who Andrew regarded as being endowed with something less than holiness. Whew. But Schwab did take into the conference with him, in his own handwriting, six sheets of copper plate figures representing to his mind the physical worth and the potential earning capacity of every steel company he regarded as an essential star in the new metal firmament. 4 men pondered over these figures all night. The chief, of course, was Morgan, steadfast in his belief in the divine right of money. With him was his aristocratic partner, Robert Bacon, a scholar and a gentleman. The third was John W. Gates, whom Morgan scorned as a gambler and used as a tool. The fourth was Schwab, who knew more about the processes of making and selling steel than any whole group of men then living. Throughout that conference, the Pittsburghers' figures were never questioned. If he said a company was worth so much, then it was worth that much and no more. He was insistent, too, upon including in the combination only those concerns he nominated. He had conceived a corporation in which there would be no duplication, not even to satisfy the greed of friends who wanted to unload their companies upon the broad Morgan shoulders. Thus he left out by design a number of the larger concerns upon which the walruses and carpenters of Wall Street had cast hungry eyes. When dawn came, Morgan rose and straightened his back. Only one question remained. "Do you think you can persuade Andrew Carnegie to sell?" he asked. "I can try," said Schwab. "If you can get him to sell, I will undertake the matter," said Morgan. So far, so good. But would Carnegie sell? How much would he demand? Schwab thought about $320 million. What would he take payment in? Common or preferred stocks? Bonds? Cash? Nobody could raise $1/3 billion in cash. There was a golf game in January on the frost-cracking heath of St. Andrew's Links in Westchester, with Andrew bundled up in sweaters against the cold, and Charlie talking volubly as usual to keep his spirits up. But no word of business was mentioned until the pair sat down in the cozy warmth of the Carnegie cottage hard by. Then, with the same persuasiveness that had hypnotized 80 millionaires at the University Club, Schwab poured out the glittering promises of retirement and comfort, of untold millions to satisfy the old man's social caprices. Carnegie capitulated, wrote a figure on a slip of paper, handed it to Schwab, and said, "All right, that's what we'll sell it for." The figure was approximately $400 million and was reached by taking the $320 million mentioned by Schwab as a base figure and adding to it $80 million to represent the increased capital value over the previous 2 years. Later, on the deck of a transatlantic liner, the Scotsman said ruefully to Morgan, "I wish I had asked you for $100 million more." "If you had asked for it, you'd have gotten it," Morgan told him tearfully. The 38-year-old Schwab had his reward. He was made president of the new corporation and remained in control until 1930. This dramatic story of big business was included in this book because it is a perfect illustration of the method by which desire can be transmuted into its physical equivalent. I imagine some readers will question the statement that a mere intangible desire can be converted into its physical equivalent. Doubtless, some will say you cannot convert nothing into something. Who know about turning nothing into something? Hey, the answer is in the story of United States Steel. That giant organization was created in the mind of one man. The plan by which the organization was provided with the steel mills that gave it financial stability was created in the mind of the same man. His faith, his desire, his imagination, his persistence were the real ingredients that went into the United States Steel. The steel mills and mechanical equipment acquired by the corporation after it had been brought into legal existence were incidental, but careful analysis will disclose the fact that the appraised value of the properties acquired by the corporation increased in value by an estimated $600 million by the mere transaction that consolidated them under one management. So boy bought it for 4. It increased in value by 6. In other words, Charles M. Schwab's idea, the power of thought, plus the faith or belief it can be done, with which he conveyed it to the minds of J.P. Morgan and others, was marketed for a profit of approximately $600 million. So, excuse me, he bought it for 4, it went to 10. No, it bought it for 4, it went to a billion. And then therefore, the profit was 600 mil. Not an insignificant sum for a single idea. What happened to some of the people who took their share of the millions of dollars of profit made by this transaction is matter with which we are not now concerned. Oh yeah, he's basically what happened to the people in this transaction is not really what's important. The important feature of the astounding achievement is that it serves as an unquestionable evidence of the soundness of the philosophy described in this book. Moreover, the practicality of the philosophy has been established by the fact that the United States Steel Corporation prospered. It became one of the richest and most powerful corporations in America, employing thousands of people, developing new uses for steel, and opening new markets, thus proving that $600 million in profit which the Schwab idea produced was earned. Riches began in the form of thought. The amount is limited only by the person in whose mind the thought is put into motion. Faith removes limitation. Remember this when you are ready to bargain with life for whatever it is that you ask as your price for having had blah blah blah. Too many bars. Remember this when you are ready to bargain with life for wherever it is that you ask as your price for having passed this way. Remember also that the man who created the United States Steel Corporation was practically unknown at the time. He was merely Andrew Carnegie's Man Friday until he gave birth to his famous idea. After that, he quickly rose to a position of power, fame, and riches. And this ends with another excerpt, and we'll just talk about it because it's, it's the end, and I don't know this one. Now, for another example of how faith in an idea made millions for one man and through it helped countless others increase their wealth, Sir John Templeton is a man with great faith in his talent to make sound and profitable investments. Templeton was better than most people at investing money because people often made investments based on emotion and ignorance and not common sense. He felt that by using his skill in investing, he could not only provide a needed service to the small investor, but could make a good deal of money for himself as well. To accomplish this, he started a group of mutual funds to manage other people's money. This was a pioneering project as mutual funds were a relatively new concept at the time. Templeton honed that concept into what it is today. He reminisced that at the Templeton Growth Fund's first annual meeting, the participants consisted of John Templeton, one part-time employee, and one shareholder. We held the meeting in the dining room of a retired General Ford's executive to save money. The Templeton Funds now have more than 6,000 employees worldwide and $36 billion in assets. Driving that growth is the Templeton Group's well-earned reputation as the premier fund group for investing. A $10,000 investment in the Templeton Growth Fund 40 years ago is worth $3 million today. By the time he retired and sold his Templeton Group Fund interest in 1992, John Templeton estimated that he had helped 1 million people make money in addition to his own success. And when he sold it in 1992, it was estimated at 400 mil. Why he sold that 400 mil too? So Andrew Carnegie sold that 400 mil, and this John Templeton dude, they both sold that 400 mil. That's crazy. Well, that's the way to end it off, man. At the end of the day, power of thought, having the burning desire to put it into action, and then having the faith and belief that it's already happened, and you just preparing for it to align with it. You feel me? Thanks for another episode of Read and Roll Up. Holla at you.